It's Clive Priddle. I am the host of The Current, and joining me today for a special Halloween-themed edition is Amy Bruni. Amy is the author of Life with the Afterlife, and of course very well known from her work on television over many years, tiptoeing around the paranormal. Very happy that you're joining us in a very real sense today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So the Current has been a sort of fairly serious-minded show for much of the episodes that we've done. And one of the things that struck me about the way that you talk about ghosts and ghost hunting and interacting with the paranormal is that you're also quite serious-minded about it. You take your ghosts seriously, and one of the things I love about you is that you're very well-mannered with them. Now, quite often you say, the worst way to go find a ghost is to march into a spooky house and start yelling. Talk to them nicely. Tell me how you worked all this out. How did you work out how to talk to ghosts?
Well, I think I started out looking for ghosts because they were kind of an adrenaline rush for me, like a novelty. I wanted to get scared. But then over the years, as I encountered more and more of what I believe to be spirits, I realized that, there is this idea that ghosts are or were people too, and that maybe their goal was not necessarily just to frighten us. And so now I walk into a paranormal investigation like I'm walking into a party and I don't know anybody and I want to introduce myself. It's very casual. I always just try to be kind. Sometimes the spirits are very receptive to that. Other times they're not. You never know who you're talking to, but I always feel like it's better to enter a scenario like that.
I think you talked elsewhere about the fact that you sort of got a sense that you were going to be one to deal with the spirits from a very young age as a child. So tell us a little bit how that happened.
It's funny when you talk to a lot of investigators and researchers, a lot of them tend to have had experiences as children, and I think that as a child, you're just naturally a lot more inquisitive of the idea of spirits and not necessarily afraid of them yet, as long as you haven't been taught to be afraid of them. And so for me, I had these encounters. I was intensely curious about it. I never thought it would be a career path at all. But it was something that I was always into. And, I go through like my yearbooks and stuff from like junior high school and high school, and people like called me the spooky ghost girl and stuff. So I was very well known for this hobby of mine.
Where was your first ghost? Who was your first ghost?
So I grew up in this I didn't grow up there, but I spent a large part of my childhood in this little bungalow in Alameda, California. And there were a lot of things going on there, but I think most memorable for me and what really piqued my interest was I saw a full-bodied apparition when I was 8 years old. And I saw this man standing outside the window of our kitchen. He was dressed all in green. It was a kitchen window that was up above the ground. So there was no way anybody could have been standing there. It was on the second floor. And I remember just backing out of the kitchen and calling my mom and bringing her back. And this man was gone, of course. But we found out later that the people who had owned that house originally had lost a son in World War II. And that there used to be a wraparound porch there. So there was a time that someone could have stood in that window and looked inside. But we had no knowledge of that at the time.
Did he look as though he was wearing army greens? Is that what you...
I think so. It was one of those kind of fleeting moments because as a child, there's this like moment of that doesn't make sense and also stranger danger. like there's a strange man outside the window. And I remember like kind of backing out as quickly as possible, but very distinctly seeing that kind of army green color, but then running to get my mom.
It's interesting that your first ghost should be a soldier. There are some wonderful stories of ghosts in wartime as well. Famously in World War One, large numbers of people in the trenches believed that they saw an angel who they thought was going to be a guardian angel over them during the conflict. I think some people who doubt the reality of that would say, well, that's a sort of stress-induced moment. It's a projection. So you've dealt with a lot of skepticism. If in your world, you have to deal with skepticism. You've got to have a lot of people coming to some extent, like me, saying, come on, prove it, or how come I can't see it? How do you deal with the skeptics?
I think Originally, I used to get very defensive when people came at me in a skeptical way. And then it dawned on me one day that I don't really need to convince skeptics. It's not my job to convince people to believe in ghosts. I'm really interested in the people who are genuinely curious about it, want to ask me, very real questions about it. And people who've had experiences of their own. And, I was actually just having a conversation with a pretty hardcore skeptic the other night. And I said, I completely understand it. I'm actually a very skeptical investigator. I always look for the alternate explanation before I'll call anything a ghost or a spirit. And I'm the first one to tell you that I don't even know for sure that I'm dealing with ghosts or spirits. I don't know for sure what these experiences are caused by, that they could be explained one day by quantum physics or something, But that being said, what if I'm right? I would rather be completely wrong and talking in the dark to people that aren't there than just automatically dismissing them. Because if I am right and they are there and they do need conversation and they do need help, then at least I was receptive to it. If I'm wrong, then I'm just the kooky lady who talked to no one in the dark. So.
Well, and you got a couple of TV shows out of it, so there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly, that's true. There was a time when I was a project manager in a cubicle, and then, 14 years later, I'm still on TV.
So have you ever been in a situation where you have been absolutely sure that there's some sort of apparition or spiritual presence that you can visualize at the same time as you're standing next to somebody else and they are absolutely not seeing it?
Well, yeah, kind of. What I did experience was, what I found is that sometimes people experience things differently. So something may happen, but they receive it differently. So that's why sometimes I wonder if there's a psi element to like a psychic element to what we're experiencing. So for example, I saw very famously on Kindred Spirits, an apparition of a man on the 4th floor standing right before me, wearing what appeared to be some sort of hospital gown or what have you. And he looked very angry. And it's probably one of the clearest apparitions I've ever seen. So Adam Berry, my partner on the show, was looking the exact same direction. And rather than see the entire apparition, he saw like more of a fleeting movement, and he saw something standing there, but he did not see it in near the detail that I saw it. I saw it in such detail that I was genuinely frightened because it appeared and disappeared. And I was so scared. I covered my eyes and I asked Adam to lead me out of there because I didn't want to see this again. Like, I was so scared of it. It just caught me off guard. And and I'm someone that's been doing this for so long, but I had not seen something like that before. But it was really strange that we were both looking the same way. And I saw this very clearly, but he saw it just not nearly as clearly, but saw something there too. Like, he jumped at the same time. So that I find to be very interesting.
Clearly that encounter was a kind of different thing qualitatively to some of the other encounters that you've had with spirits, which are much more benign and conversational and don't leave you with the same level of goosebumps.
Yes, absolutely. I always tell people that I feel like the personality traits you had when you were alive, you're going to exist or you're going to have in the afterlife. So, if someone was a jerk when they were alive, there's a very good chance they're going to be a jerk as a ghost. And so, but that being said, most people aren't jerks. Most people are inherently kind or conversational. And so a lot of the spirits we encounter are scared or confused, or needing something. And then there are others that want nothing to do with us. So it's just kind of figuring out that kind of psychological component of like, who are you dealing with?
So I want to ask you about location now. My parents own a house in France. It's got some very old parts. We've got a couple of beams that were cut down as trees when the first Crusades were heading east. And they have a ghost in their house. Of course they do.
Of course.
I think it adds to the retail value. And it's a ghost of a miserable queen. So you hear her wandering about, but she's not a lot of fun. I mean, she really feels, she's kind of depressive spirit slightly, but it's kind of nice to have her around. We're fond of her, but she's not a party animal. But the location seems to demand a ghost in their case. You know, they've got the building, it feels old, it's got nooks and crannies. Of course, it's got to have a ghost somewhere rattling around. Now, America doesn't seem to me to be prime territory for ghosts. We're constantly knocking down our old buildings and building new shiny ones. Have you found a good distribution of spirits around the architecture of the United States? Or do ghosts not mind? Are they happy to show up in a brand new office block in your cubicle if they want to?
Oh yeah, we found them everywhere. You know, it's you know, I think that there is this idea that spirits are tied to a structure of some sort or land, but we've found spirits that have traveled to different places and appeared in different places, or appeared to people like you know. We just finished filming a new episodes of Kindred Spirits, and I know there's one case where there's a spirit traveling between a person's home and then the new inn that they had just bought. You know, this wasn't, and so like this spirit was with them, or sometimes we'll find spirits that are with an object, or, you know, people will do something, or there's something about a household that will attract spirits. You know, we find many times busy households with lots of children and things will attract spirits of children. So it's not necessarily this, you know, we do call these big spooky old houses, you know, we look at them, we go, that ought to be haunted, you know, but it's not mandatory. I've been into plenty of very old spaces that have no ghosts, and plenty of brand new homes that are very, very haunted.
How about other aspects of context? You know, you sort of think ghosts, you know, they arrive at dusk, they do their thing through the night hours, but we don't expect them for breakfast. I mean, do ghosts show up at weddings? Are they inappropriate visitors as well as?
Well, here's the thing. How would you know if they did? You know, and that's why people, we think, see more spirits at night, is because the world has slowed down. You're more aware. You know, your senses are heightened. It's dark. There's not traffic outside. People aren't milling about. So it's a lot more obvious when something's going on that shouldn't necessarily be happening. But, you know, during the day, it's not to say there aren't spirits during the day. We've investigated many times during the day and had many claims of spirits that happened during the day. But the reality is that sometimes there's so much happening around us. And honestly, these days, so many people are looking like this at their phones. They could be missing a number of things happening right in front of them.
Yeah, although of course phones have also provided windows to spirits, haven't they? I mean, people have seen in the backgrounds of pictures things that they didn't think were there in the floor. Or are we very skeptical about tech fiddling?
I'm skeptical about it. There is, with the advent of phones, there are, yes, you know, there's something called selective memory. There's been a lot of experiments done with this where, you know, for example, there's a very famous YouTube video that basically you watch this video, and at the beginning of the video, they say, count how many times this basketball is passed between the people wearing a white shirt and the people wearing a black shirt. And so you're so intent watching this basketball. What you do not notice is in the middle of this experiment, someone literally walks in a gorilla suit, beats their chest, and walks out of the room, and you don't even notice that they were there. And so when people say, I took this picture in this battlefield and I know no one was standing there, do you really know? You know, this is days, sometimes weeks later, that you notice this figure in the background. And so phones are amazing for a lot of things, but they have filled my inbox with a lot of photos that I can't prove or deny, really, you know. So I always tell people, just be really aware, because, you know, we want to have good evidence. We don't want to call everything a ghost. You know, we don't want to have so much confirmation bias that, you know, suddenly every little orb we find in a photo is our, you know, great aunt Maud or something. You know, we do want to be believable. We want to be serious with what we're doing. So
let me suggest that we turn it around for a second, and instead of the idea that in a quiet time, with all the hustle and bustle removed, the traffic noise is down, you're in a remote space with a suggestive wooden building in the background, and at that point you are able to perceive the ghost. Let me suggest to you that in fact it's exactly the opposite thing that's going on. That when you're denied the reassuring hustle and bustle, the kids needing to be fed, the phone ringing, and all the other things that keep us distracted, what our imaginations do is they fill the space, and what we're primarily afraid of is being alone. And so at some point, if we sit still for long enough and it's that quiet, we are going to fill the space. And so that, in fact, the ghosts are being summoned by you because that's what you need, not because the ghost is necessarily inherently in that space.
Well, that's actually a really interesting theory because, many times, and I think I talk about this in the book a lot, is how I do believe there is this idea that we are creating a lot of our ghosts, that a lot of spirits actually do come from us, not necessarily invented in our minds, but that we do put some energy out there that can sometimes create spirit. There was this very famous experiment done called the Philip experiment, where a group of researchers created a spirit. They all thought about Philip and his different traits and what he did for a living. And then they held a seance and they started communicating with this spirit, Philip, that never existed. They just created him. And we've experimented with that as well. So there's this idea that, some spirits, and we found it in places that are very heavily investigated, are actually like, if we pass away and leave energy behind that creates a spirit, why can't we leave that energy behind when we're alive? If you believe you can infuse a space with positivity and visualize joy in your life, like so many people like to do, if you believe in that kind of energy, why don't we believe in this kind of energy that we can also leave behind that can create spirits? So, and also right now we've noticed during the pandemic, people are home so much, working from home, stressed to the max, there's a lot more activity that they're noticing. So are they creating that because they're filling a void, or are they creating that because they're infusing their space with that confusion and negativity? So who knows?
So in a way, there's an argument that says that the spiritual entity is a projection, that it's the projection of the people who are looking for it, or they're throwing something into that space, and then it accumulates around a form.
I believe that is some of the spirits that we encounter. I think that is a form of a haunting that very much exists, especially the more I've done this and the more I've been in these spaces that have been very heavily investigated. We are seeing more and more of that. Suddenly a space that was kind of haunted a few years ago is now majorly haunted, so I think there's something to that.
Okay, so that makes me wonder if basically ghosts are good for us. Are they making happy ghost hunters because they are good projections of something into that space? In other words, if I'm stressed, you mentioned we're talking about ghosts and spirits in a stressful time for the world, because a lot of people have died unexpectedly this year, and a lot of people are sick, and that makes people very anxious. So I don't want to be insensitive about that. But is it actually something that makes us feel happier? Do you think that ghost hunters as a crew are a pretty happy gang, that they're at peace with their ghosts, and that they derive satisfaction, they derive something positive from the experience they're looking for?
I think it depends. Like, I know personally in the paranormal community, I have a lot of very close friends, and I enjoy spending time with them, that, other weirdos who think like me, but there are the people who are kind of, I don't want to say novice at it. They have a casual interest in it. And then they find themselves on one of these like organized ghost hunts or something. And they're sitting in the dark, shaking, terrified of what they could potentially see. And so there's this difference between kind of the thrill seeker and then the person who has been doing this for a while, or some people just remain thrill seekers, which is absolutely fine. So I think there is something to the community aspect of it. And yeah, most investigators I find are happy people, but it is a belief system. It is wondering about the afterlife. And, historically speaking, interest in the paranormal peaks after tragic, events like wars. And I do expect probably after the pandemic, or during, it seems to be going on and on. But people are suddenly faced with their own mortality, and they're thinking about it a lot, and they're thinking about what happens next. And usually after like things like that, like after the Civil War and after Vietnam, interest in the paranormal surges. So I think that has something to do with it too.
Yeah, so we've definitely seen that historically, haven't we? I mean, one of the great sort of post World War One spiritualists, I think, was Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
And that's kind of surprising when we look at his most famous fictional creation. You know, Sherlock Holmes is a rationalist. He's a scientist. He discovers by deduction, by logic, by reasoning, and by evidence. And here is the creator of that character saying, no, I'm believing in higher powers entirely. And I think he lost a son in the war, which may have had something to do with that.
Right.
So clearly there's a need that the spiritual world satisfies, and that it does roll around at certain times particularly strongly. But presumably it's also a sort of constant.
I mean, I think, especially this time of year, people suddenly have a massive interest in spirits and ghosts, but there are definite like peaks and valleys in interest in the paranormal. But it is ever present. You know, people have always had this interest. People like me, you know, I've been doing this now for a very long time. and I, you know, my interest never wanes. I just always have more questions.
Well, so your book promises in its subtitle 13 truths that you learned about ghosts. So obviously we want people who are listening to this to go rush out and buy your book to find all 13, but maybe you could dangle one or two in front of us, perhaps the ones that perhaps caught you out, that were most surprising to you.
Well, let me see. I would say, well, we kind of already talked about ghosts or people too. If ghosts are real, then Bigfoot is probably real too. That's one of the chapter titles. And I think, and then I think the final chapter is don't believe everything you read.
Is that everything you read outside of your book, or everything you read inside?
I encourage people to question every single thing I told them in my book.
Okay,
I do.
So that's an interesting thing too to me, because you know, when I was reading around you and your work ahead of this time, of course, you know, I was looking at the way that people describe your programs, and you are categorized as reality TV and documentary and reality TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry a little bit that the world of the spirits shouldn't be categorized as reality TV, because not everybody can appreciate that reality. And the documentary is pretty tough too, because the documentation here is at least contested. I mean, I don't mean to suggest for a moment that you don't believe in what you're saying, seeing, but that I may not be able to see it means that there is some degree of difference from a much more tangible reality. If I drive my car into that lamppost, there's a dent in the car, there's a dent in the lamppost, there's a evidence for the concussion that we can all agree on, which isn't quite as tangible as your ghost. And does this matter at all? Perhaps not. But right now, in an era of sort of fake news and challenging of what is verifiable and what is not, do you feel comfortable being in reality TV and documentary, or would you rather have a different space for your experience? Is there a different language that might be better?
No, I think it's fair, because the reality is that the reality of it is that they're actually documenting us. They're documenting us in our line of work. They're not documenting the ghosts themselves, because I hear that from viewers all the time. How come you see a ghost, but the camera is not panning around looking at the ghost? And I try to tell them, I go, the show's not just about the ghosts. The show's about us and what we do. And it's our job to document the ghosts using our equipment. So if we miss it, we miss it. We try our best, you know, but, so yeah, I think it's fair in the sense that, you know, whether or not you believe in what we're doing, the show is about what we're doing, not necessarily saying that what we're doing is real to you. I mean, it's real to me, and it is very hard to be on a reality television show and maintain your integrity, but I have worked very hard to do so. So yeah, I just always tell people the show's about us, not necessarily the ghosts. So.
But you have equipment. You have monitoring devices.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk a bit about that? How do you monitor a ghost?
Yeah. Well, you know, here's the thing. Actually, as I've as I've kind of progressed as an investigator, I love trying to document spirits. We put cameras up everywhere. We blanket everything with our cameras. We have a lot of detectors and digital voice recorders. But the more that I have done this, the more that I enjoy more of a kind of set it and forget it approach. I like to put the equipment down, let it do its thing, but I like to walk in just me and just talk and be personable. And I don't like to be fidgeting with a lot of gadgets and worrying about capturing things, because I'm more personal experience based now, because I have kind of moved on from this need to prove, and now it's like, okay, I'm going to do this for me and for who is with me in this. If I'm helping a family or a business, I'm doing this for them. I'm not doing it to prove to the world that the spirits exist, so that, but a lot of people enjoy the equipment and the tech side, and I do too, but I don't get really into it, because I did that originally, and sometimes you lose yourself in it.
So I want to ask a question on behalf of Anthony Goff, who's our audio publisher at Hachette. It's a serious question, actually. So in two respects. One is that most people, when they think of ghosts and spirits, they require an apparition. They got to have a visual. But I don't see why that should be so at all. In fact, maybe we're being even less respectful of the audio life of spirits than we are of the visual life of them. That we're not very good at listening at the best of times. Our other senses tend to overwhelm our ability to listen well. So I want to ask you about whether sometimes the perception is driven by senses other than your eyes, your visual sense. Can it be a sense of smell that leads you to a spirit? Can it be a sense of taste or of listening? Have you heard a good ghost sing?
Actually, I've heard a ghost whistle, but I would say audio is more important to us than seeing, for us. So you can let him know that.
He'll be thrilled. He'll be absolutely thrilled.
We rely heavily, maybe he'll have answers for us as to how this works, but we rely heavily on our digital voice recorder, because we will ask questions. And there's one in particular that we use that's older, from like the 90s. And we seem to get the best results with it. And it's voice activated. So it doesn't record unless it hears something. And we will ask questions, and sometimes, and we leave a pause in between, everyone's quiet, and we will get sometimes full sentence responses. And then we'll go back and we'll take this information, and maybe we'll dig a little deeper in the research, and we'll find a name that correlates with what we got on the recorder. Or, there's some that we like to have this trifecta of evidence, research, and history, and then we do bring in a medium sometimes as well. And if we get something that correlates on all three of those levels, we know we're onto something. But audio, I would say, is the biggest for us. Like, I love seeing an apparition, I love viewing it, but it doesn't really tell me as much as having a conversation. So throughout the book and throughout Kindred Spirits and Ghost Hunters, like, our EVPs are hugely important to our cases.
You've had this perception since a very young age. You've continued with it. It's your professional existence right now. Life is clearly better with ghosts. And I totally sign up for that too. I mean, even though I'm much more doubtful, inherently doubtful, I'm much more of one of those guys who I kind of need to see it slap me around the face before I believe it. But in no way do I think that life will be more interesting if we ruled out the possibility of this.
Right.
So tell me, how do you keep going? What do you look for next? Where do you take this idea of the spirit world and then journey further from having done it for so long?
That's a great question. I mean, for me, it's just, as I said before, the more I do this, the more questions I have. I think probably one of the biggest theories I'm exploring right now is what we spoke about earlier, is the idea that we are creating our ghosts, and so I do have a group of friends and researchers who I interview heavily throughout the book, that we are always thinking of new strange experiments to try to kind of see, how can we push these limits, and how can we kind of create activity or find activity. And so right now, that's what's holding my interest, is really kind of thinking outside the box and doing things a little differently. Will it be holding my interest 5 years from now? I don't know, but like there's always been some sort of progression, so for now it's great. And I do sometimes wonder, like, is there going to be a day where I wake up where I'm like, I think I've done this. I think I've explored every possibility there is. But I would like to see it progress more with kind of exploring the idea of quantum physics and science and energy studies. And I do think there is something there, but it's hard to get the scientific community behind the idea of the paranormal because it's not something that follows the scientific method. Human emotion is not something that you can replicate perfectly every time under the same exact circumstances. And so if you're assuming that a spirit is based on a human's energy, it's not always predictable, which science likes things that are predictable, but we are not predictable things. So,
am I right in thinking that the idea of ghosts or spirits is one of the most culturally consistent notions across the world in pretty much any society? Is there anywhere in the world that doesn't believe in ghosts?
No, but there are areas of the world who take them a lot more seriously than we do, and who have a lot of superstitions surrounding them. And I have met people in my travels who think I'm doing the devil's work, and I've also met people that they revere their spirits, and so it's really interesting because it's almost like religion. There is like kind of this moral compass across the board throughout all these different religions. And then there is also through all these different cultures, this same kind of belief in spirits in some regard.
I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank you also for allowing me to combine my measure of doubt with your sense of wonder in terms of talking about ghosts, which I think is a lovely way to approach it. Good luck with Halloween. I hope you're not overwhelmed. And really, thank you, Amy, so much for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. It's been a really fun conversation. I enjoyed it.
Hachette,